Tom Pelissero covering the NFL. And Tom, before we get started, height and weight, please.
Listed weight on my driver's license and height, 5'11", 155. In reality, I believe I'm 5'9" 3/4, #161.
Did Kyler Murray ruin the story now that he's 5'10"? Isn't the story better if he's under 5'10"?
To me, the bigger story was that his hands measured in at 9.5 inches. Now, as we've seen in the past with the likes of Brandon Allen, Cooper Rush, there are various YouTube videos that you can watch and perhaps gain a 1/4 inch or so, but he was all the way up at 9.5 inches. That's Matt Ryan territory. It's not quite the Russell Wilson, Drew Brees 10.25 myth, but it's not bad.
All right. How much of a buzz did Kyler Murray's measurements ring out there in Indianapolis?
I got a bunch of texts from scouts today saying good for him that he was able to pack on pounds. You know, when scouts were going through there circa October, Kyler Murray was weighing like 189 pounds, which obviously is very light. He's an outlier in every different way. You know, this is a player who, based upon the measurements on paper and what you see, 10 years ago you would have been talking about him in draft meetings, but you would have been talking about him as a slot receiver. It seems like some of those hard, fast rules I don't want to say have gone out the window, but teams seem more willing to accept the fact that maybe some of the body types and things that are outliers, may not be completely prohibitive to having success in the NFL.
Yeah, it'd be like Antoine Randall L., who was a quarterback in Indiana and then, of course, became that slot receiver for the Steelers. I was also wondering this, that, we measure everybody's words with what they say, certainly at the Combine. And you had the Cardinals GM, Steve Keim, where he said, Josh Rosen's our quarterback for now. And everybody jumped on the for now. What do you think is going to happen with the Cardinals? Because it feels like that. I don't know if it was a slip, but I'm hoping it's a little more calculated than that from the Cardinals' perspective.
It was calculated. I can tell you, having spoken to people with the Cardinals and just kind of asked around here, they are enjoying the fact that for the next 56 days, I think it is, they're going to be the center of the universe, and all the speculation is going to be on the number one pick. It is interesting that after the season, there were strong support issued for Josh Rosen, and now you begin to get these little hints about, right now and all those other things. Could the Cardinals want to potentially have somebody trade up, get a draft haul, move back, and take Kyler Murray? Could they just think that they can put the pick up for bid in general? They got a lot of work to do on their roster, but everything for them through this offseason, from the hiring of Cliff Kingsbury on down, has really seemed to be about, please come to Glendale, please get in the stadium, please buy season tickets, drafting the Heisman Trophy winner, who is an exciting player regardless of his measurements, would kind of fit that pattern. But there's also a lot of skepticism from people who know that team that on draft day they're actually going to do it and take Kyler Murray number one.
Yeah, I think if you're all in on Cliff Kingsbury, then be all in on Kyler Murray, because Josh Rosen might turn out to be a good quarterback. You're not coming out to see Josh Rosen. You'll come out and see Kyler Murray, and the Cardinals were not relevant last year. Nobody cared. Cleveland became relevant because of Baker Mayfield. So not that that's why you take somebody, but in this situation, Kyler Murray, I would have no problem whatsoever taking him and, trying to find a trade partner for Josh Rosen.
That's a large part of why it makes sense. Even setting aside the football, you're right. It has been about creating excitement. I mean, trying to get people in the seats, trying to sell corporate sponsorships and all that. What's fascinating is Cliff Kingsbury in his opening press conference, and Steve Keim has said it since, talking about how Josh Rosen can fit in that scheme. Well, Josh Rosen could not be more of a polar opposite as a quarterback from Kyler Murray. Josh Rosen is a pocket passer. He's going to stand in there, read the defense, and throw. With Kyler Murray, you're looking at something along the lines of what likely the Seahawks did with Russell Wilson, which is bootlegs, get him outside the pocket, get him on the move, not just utilize the athletic ability, but make sure that he can be able to see downfield. Are you going to have to go to a full shotgun scheme all the time? Are you going to be able to play him some under center? There's a lot of things you'd have to figure out, but there was no precedent to take a 6-foot quarterback last year at number one overall. Yeah. That worked out pretty well with Baker Mayfield, and now Kyler Murray. Okay, let's just lower the bar. In a few years here, we'll have a 5'6" passer going number one.
Yeah, people's heads exploded last year when Baker Mayfield at 6 feet. Can he play? And I was like, do you watch him play? like we get caught up in the measurables, and then you talk yourself out of drafting somebody because you're going, well, he can't. We look at all the teams. The example I used yesterday, Tom, is all the people who talked themselves out of drafting Steph Curry or Steve Nash because they didn't think that they could hold up to the rigors of the NBA. And my point is always, who's guarding them? They may not be able to guard somebody, but who's guarding them? And if you have an advantage in that situation, then you take that guy. And you had two Hall of Famers that, teams passed on because they didn't measure up to what size you had to be. Cleveland did the same thing. They said, you know what, the heck with it. We think he can play. Either Kyler Murray can or can't play. I don't care how tall he is.
Well, think about this, Dan. With all the new metrics and all the different ways that you can test guys in this environment, they still run the 40-yard dash. They still do the shuttle. They still do the three cone. And a big part of that is because you're talking about comps. It's all about being able to compare, okay, who is this guy like? How did that project forward? That's how scouts look at it. They want to be looking at guys 20 years ago and figuring out, okay, in the past, what has happened when you've had some similar types of numbers. I mean, I always think back to one thing that Bill Parcells told his scouts for years and years, which is if you were trying to make a case for somebody in the draft room who was a little bit of an outlier, he'd go, name one. Name one guy who you're saying is like this guy. And if you couldn't do it, it was going to be a really tough sell. You can't name one like Kyler Murray, but you couldn't name one like Baker Mayfield either. Of course, you have guys like Drew Brees and Russell Wilson, but those are rare talents. And Baker showed in year one that certainly the game's not too big for him.
But this isn't about Drew Brees as much as it is Russell Wilson, in my opinion, because Brees is a pocket quarterback. He's not a scrambler. He's not fast. But Russell Wilson, it feels like, changed the optics of what a quarterback has to be or can be. And I think he opened the door more than Drew Brees did. What do you think?
Well, and Russell Wilson was also a third-round pick. And there were teams, I can tell you, that had Baker Mayfield in the third round on their draft boards last year. They just didn't believe that it was going to be able to translate, not entirely because he couldn't play, but just where is the value? I mean, John Dorsey taking Baker Mayfield number one certainly opens some new windows here in terms of, okay, this guy may not fit, but you can't entirely also be looking at what are other teams going to do? Where are other teams going to have him on the board? If you think you can get the quarterback for the next 10, 15 years, take him. It's in my opinion, and just talking to people through the years, if you are convinced that this guy is a franchise quarterback, if you take him at number 1 or number 12 or number 60, it doesn't matter. Go get that guy. If you're wrong, of course, it's going to boomerang on you just as hard regardless of where you ended up taking him.
Talking to Tom Pelissero, the NFL Network. You can follow the NFL Network reporter on his Twitter, and it's at Tom Pelissero. NFL Network providing live coverage of the 2019 NFL Scouting Combine, March 1st through the 4th. The market for Nick Foles, it's open, but it doesn't seem like there's a lot of places here. That's not a big. I don't know. I'm wondering what the market.
Dan.
That's it.
It's Jacksonville. That is the market. That's part of the reason. They're a huge part of the reason that the Eagles weren't able to find a trade partner. As soon as the Broncos made their trade for Joe Flacco, that made it virtually impossible for the Eagles to create any kind of a trade market. And the Jaguars, I can tell you, never showed interest in making a trade for Nick Foles. Now, it's a completely different conversation now. You're into simply signing him as a free agent. If you look at some of the other teams that we don't know, and there's not many of them, who the starting quarterback is going to be, with the Washington Redskins, they've not ruled out Alex Smith playing at some point in 2019. Alex Smith is not ruled out playing at some point in 2019, and they are still paying a lot of money for Alex Smith. So there's some reasons to think that if they bring in somebody else, it'll be a lower-level veteran. They may draft somebody. The Miami Dolphins is the other one. Well, the Dolphins are going to go young. They're going to be sort of a rebuilding type of an operation. Do you want to be paying a quarterback $20 million a year when you're in that spot? Probably not. So the Jaguars just make so much sense. We can oversimplify things at times. I don't think this is one of those cases. He's worked with the offensive coordinator, John DeFilippo, when both of them were in Philadelphia. They've got a defense that's already made. They are a run-first offense. They can gear things around Foles. It makes a ton of sense unless somebody else emerges here and really makes a play, which will also make it interesting to see how much money Foles is able to get if, in fact, there's really only one team.
If we're going to slice up Steve Keim's words, the Cardinals GM yesterday, then I have to do the same to Mike Mayock, the new Raiders GM, where he did say Derek Carr's a franchise quarterback. He didn't say our franchise quarterback. Do you think the Raiders are all in on Derek Carr moving forward?
I don't think the Raiders are all in on anything moving forward except for John Gruden and probably Mike Mayock. They've got 3 first-round draft picks. They've got holes all over the place in terms of their roster. They traded away Khalil Mack and Amari Cooper, in a span of a couple of months last year, and they've still got a year at least until they end up playing in Las Vegas. Everything's been for them focused forward on 2020, getting to Vegas, being ready to roll then. But they've got a lot of work to do. Is Derek Carr the guy? I know that John Gruden has spoken highly of his working relationship with Carr, that he does believe in him. But, talking to people around the league here in Indianapolis, I certainly don't get the sense that anybody is ruling anything out, including them potentially taking a quarterback in this draft.
One other thing, and I know that you wrote about this, reported on this. I'll go back to Kyler Murray and the role that his dad could play in all of this. Is he one of those helicopter parents hovering here, and could that be an issue?
Well, Dan, you had Kyler on your show. I believe at one point you were asking Dad to chime in for a comment within that interview. And I can tell you, credit to the show, a lot of NFL people were watching that too. A lot of NFL people were watching all the interviews that Kyler Murray did during Super Bowl week. They were awkward, to say the least.
Were they bothered by it, Tom?
They certainly got the sense that this was not a kid who is in control of his career. And that is not just simply from those interviews. It's also from digging into what happened when he transferred from Texas A&M, digging into the way that, baseball has kind of been an influence here, and the fact that, early December, Scott Boras is proclaiming publicly that Kyler Murray is completely committed to the A's. Meanwhile, 2 months before that, scouts have been getting asked by people at Oklahoma saying, hey, Kyler's dad's been calling about potential draft projections for the NFL. What do you think of the guy? It's not something that is, something that's going to rule out Kyler Murray or a huge knock on the kid, who by all accounts is a very nice kid. He's more introverted, quiet, laid back than a lot of quarterbacks. But teams are absolutely going to want to spend time with Kevin Murray. They're not entirely comfortable just with baseball being in the back pocket. If Kyler goes to a team he doesn't want to, or if he's not starting right away, could baseball potentially be an influence? I reached out to Kevin Murray before I wrote about this and talked about it. He says that we're advising Kyler, but he's the one making his decisions. He's all in on football. It's, something that teams that are potentially drafting Kyler Murray are just going to want to examine thoroughly, because you've got to ultimately develop the confidence that we're not going to be wasting a pick here.
Thank you, Tom. You're doing a great job. Have fun there in Indianapolis.
Thanks for having me, Dan. That's
Tom Pelissero, NFL Network reporter. Man, that's just one of those interviews that's always going to be cringeworthy. Always. The Dan Patrick Show brought to you by Mercedes-AMG. They sponsor the Man Cave. Just go to the Dan Patrick Show app if you missed any of our interviews, including the one with Kyler Murray at the Super Bowl. Mercedes-AMG driving performance.
For more Dan Patrick Show, tune to Audience Channel 239 on DirecTV or download the Dan Patrick Show app.